My ex-wife tried to get custody by claiming I was mentally unstable. The psychiatric evaluation showed she was projecting. The divorce papers hit me like a freight train on a Tuesday morning in November. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone when the doorbell rang. The courier handed me the manila envelope with that official court seal, and I knew my world was about to change forever. What I didn't expect was the bombshell waiting inside those legal documents that would turn my entire understanding of reality upside down. She wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was going for full custody of our two kids, claiming I was mentally unstable and unfit to be a parent. The allegations were brutal and specific: erratic behavior, mood swings, inability to handle stress, and something about me being a danger to the children's emotional well-being. I read through the paperwork 3 times, each pass making my hands shake more than the last, feeling like I was reading about a stranger rather than myself. The timing couldn't have been worse. I'd been working double shifts at the warehouse for months, trying to save money for a family vacation we'd been planning since spring. The kids had been so excited about going to Disney World, and now their mother was painting me as some kind of unstable monster who couldn't be trusted with their safety. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was the one who'd been acting strange for months, but apparently nobody else had noticed. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier, but love has a way of making you blind to uncomfortable truths. She'd been increasingly paranoid about everything, checking the locks multiple times before bed, accusing me of hiding things from her, and having these intense mood swings that would come out of nowhere. One minute she'd be laughing with the kids, the next she'd be screaming at me about forgetting to buy milk or leaving a dish in the sink. I'd attributed it to stress from her job, but now I was wondering if there was something much deeper and more troubling going on. The first lawyer I consulted was brutally honest about my chances, and his words still echo in my mind months later. Family court tends to favor mothers in custody disputes, especially when mental health concerns are raised by the woman. He explained that I'd need to undergo a psychiatric evaluation to prove my stability, while also building a case that would demonstrate I was the better parent. The whole process felt like I was being forced to prove a negative. How do you prove you're not crazy when someone is determined to paint you as unstable? The weeks leading up to the evaluation were some of the darkest of my life, filled with sleepless nights and constant anxiety. I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, constantly worried about what would happen to my relationship with the kids. They were staying with their mother during the separation, and I could only see them on supervised visits twice a week. The supervised part stung the most, having some court-appointed stranger watching my every interaction with my own children, taking notes on a clipboard like I was some kind of dangerous experiment. During those visits, I noticed changes in the kids that made my stomach churn and my heart break simultaneously. My daughter, who used to be bubbly and talkative, had become withdrawn and anxious, jumping at sudden noises and avoiding eye contact. She'd flinch when I raised my voice even slightly, and she kept asking me why mommy said daddy was sick. My son, younger but usually more resilient, had started having nightmares and would ask me repeatedly if I was going to disappear like his friend's dad did after his parents got divorced. The questions from my children cut deeper than any legal document ever could. They were confused and scared, caught between two adults who were supposed to protect them but were instead creating chaos in their young lives. I found myself walking on eggshells during our visits, afraid that any normal parental behavior might be misconstrued as evidence of instability. The supervisor would scribble notes every time I helped with homework or gave them a hug, making me feel like a criminal in my own family. The psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a nondescript office building downtown, and I'd been dreading it for weeks. I'd been imagining some stern doctor, with thick glasses, asking me about my childhood and scribbling notes about my supposed mental instability. Instead, I met a surprisingly warm woman who put me at ease within the first few minutes of our conversation, though I remained cautious about opening up too quickly. She explained that the evaluation would involve multiple sessions, psychological testing, and interviews with people who knew me well. What surprised me was her suggestion that both parents undergo evaluation. Apparently, this was becoming more common in contested custody cases where mental health was a factor. When I mentioned this to my lawyer, he got excited about the possibility, though he warned me not to get my hopes up since my ex-wife's legal team would likely resist the idea. The testing itself was exhausting: hours of written assessments, problem-solving exercises, and detailed interviews about my life history. I was honest about everything: my struggles with the divorce, my concerns about the kids, And yes, the stress I'd been under trying to work extra hours while dealing with a deteriorating marriage. What became clear through the process was that my responses were consistent and grounded in reality, unlike what my ex-wife's legal team had suggested in their filings. Between the second and third evaluation sessions, something unexpected happened that would change everything. The kids were supposed to spend the weekend with their mother, but she dropped them off at my apartment on Friday evening, claiming she had a work emergency. This was unusual because she'd been fighting tooth and nail to limit my access to them, but I wasn't about to question getting extra time with my children, even if the circumstances were strange. That weekend revealed more than I'd bargained for, and I started to see the bigger picture. The kids were more relaxed than I'd seen them in months, and they started opening up about what had been happening at their mother's house. My daughter mentioned that mommy had been talking to people who weren't there, having full conversations with empty rooms. My son said she'd been checking his backpack and toys obsessively, looking for things that weren't there, convinced that someone was planting items to spy on them. They described her staying up all night, pacing around the house and muttering to herself about conspiracies and people trying to hurt the family. She'd been checking their food before letting them eat, convinced it might be poisoned. The picture they painted was of a woman who was losing touch with reality, and it broke my heart to think of my children living in that environment of fear and paranoia. I documented everything carefully, not in a vindictive way, but because I was genuinely concerned about what the kids were experiencing. The picture that emerged was troubling. Their mother seemed to be exhibiting signs of paranoid behavior that were affecting the children's sense of security. I called my lawyer immediately, and he advised me to request that the psychiatric evaluation be extended to include both parents, armed with this new information. The plot thickened when I discovered something that changed everything and made me question our entire marriage. While cleaning out some old files to prepare for the custody hearing, I found medical records that my ex-wife had left behind when she moved out. Among them were prescription bottles for antipsychotic medication that had been prescribed several months earlier. The dates coincided with when her behavior had started becoming erratic, and it appeared she'd stopped taking the medication around the time she filed for divorce. This discovery created a moral dilemma that kept me awake for days, wrestling with competing loyalties. On one hand, I wanted to protect my children and maintain my relationship with them. On the other hand, exposing my ex-wife's mental health struggles felt like a betrayal of someone I'd once loved deeply. I ultimately decided that the children's well-being had to come first, and I shared the information with my lawyer, knowing it would fundamentally change the trajectory of our case. The psychiatrist conducting the evaluation was thorough and professional throughout the process, maintaining clinical objectivity despite the emotional weight of the situation. She interviewed my ex-wife, myself, and several people who knew both of us well. What emerged from her assessment was a complete reversal of the original allegations. The evaluation revealed that I was dealing with normal stress responses to a difficult divorce situation, while my ex-wife was showing signs of untreated mental health issues that required immediate attention. The report was devastating in its clinical precision, laying out in stark detail the reality of our situation. It documented patterns of paranoid thinking, mood instability, and reality distortion that had been present for months. The psychiatrist noted that my ex-wife had been projecting her own mental health struggles onto me, a common defense mechanism when someone is struggling to accept their own condition. The recommendation was clear. I should have primary custody with supervised visitation for their mother until she received proper treatment. Reading that report felt like vindication and heartbreak at the same time, a bittersweet moment of truth. I was relieved that my fitness as a parent had been validated, but I was also saddened by the confirmation that the woman I'd married was struggling with serious mental health issues. The kids deserved better than to be caught in the middle of adult problems, and I was determined to help them through this difficult transition while protecting them from further trauma. The custody hearing was anticlimactic compared to the drama that had led up to it, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter. Armed with the psychiatric evaluation, my lawyer presented a compelling case for why I should have primary custody. My ex-wife's attorney seemed caught off guard by the report's findings, and their strategy of attacking my mental stability crumbled when faced with professional documentation of the actual situation. The judge was thorough in her review of the evidence, and she seemed particularly concerned about the children's well-being throughout the process. She ordered that I would have primary custody, with their mother having supervised visitation rights pending her engagement with mental health treatment. The judge also mandated family counseling for the kids to help them process the changes in their family structure and understand that none of this was their fault. Walking out of that courtroom with custody of my children felt like the end of a nightmare, but I knew the real work was just beginning. The kids needed stability, consistency, and a lot of patience as they adjusted to their new reality. Their mother's mental health struggles weren't going to disappear overnight, and I had to help them understand that sometimes adults need help too, without demonizing the woman who gave birth to them. The first few months of having the kids full-time were challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated, testing my patience and parenting skills daily. My daughter had developed anxiety around loud noises and sudden movements, while my son had trouble sleeping alone. We established new routines, and I made sure they knew they could talk to me about anything they were feeling. Slowly, I watched them start to relax and return to being the happy, confident kids they'd been before the divorce drama began. Their mother did eventually begin treatment, and I have to give her credit for recognizing that she needed help. The supervised visits were awkward at first, but as she stabilized on medication and worked with her therapist, interactions became more natural. The kids were cautious but wanted to maintain a relationship with their mother, and I supported that as much as possible because cutting her out completely would have hurt them more than it helped. One of the most important lessons I learned through this experience was the importance of trusting my instincts when something feels wrong. When someone you love starts acting dramatically different, it's natural to make excuses or hope things will improve on their own. But sometimes those changes are symptoms of something larger that requires professional intervention. Ignoring the signs doesn't help anyone, especially when children are involved and their safety is at stake. The whole ordeal also taught me about the complexity of mental health issues and how they can manifest in unexpected ways. My ex-wife's projection of her own struggles onto me was a textbook example of how untreated mental illness can distort someone's perception of reality. It wasn't malicious, it was a symptom of her condition, but it could have had devastating consequences for our family if left unchecked and untreated. Looking back now, I'm grateful that the truth came out when it did, even though the process was painful. The psychiatric evaluation that was meant to prove my unfitness as a parent instead revealed the real issue that needed addressing. Sometimes the system works the way it's supposed to, even when it takes time and feels unfair along the way. The kids are thriving now, and while our family looks different than I once imagined, we're building something stable and healthy together. The experience changed my perspective on divorce, custody battles, and mental health in profound ways that continue to shape how I approach relationships. I learned that being a good parent sometimes means making difficult decisions that might hurt people you care about. It also reinforced my belief that children's well-being should always be the priority, even when adult relationships become complicated and messy and emotions run high. But the story doesn't end there, because life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. About 6 months after the custody arrangement was finalized, I received a phone call that would test everything I thought I knew about forgiveness and second chances. My ex-wife had been hospitalized after a severe mental health crisis, and the doctors needed to speak with me about the children's medical history and family dynamics. Sitting in that sterile hospital waiting room, I found myself face to face with the woman I'd once planned to grow old with. She looked fragile and broken, a shadow of the vibrant person I'd fallen in love with years earlier. The medication had stabilized her, but she was dealing with the reality of how her untreated condition had affected our family. She apologized through tears, not just for the custody battle, but for putting the kids through months of uncertainty and fear. That conversation changed something fundamental in our relationship, shifting us from adversaries to co-parents working toward the same goal. She began intensive treatment, including therapy and medication management, and slowly started rebuilding her relationship with the children. The supervised visits gradually became unsupervised, though she remained in my primary custody for stability. The kids' reactions to their mother's recovery were complex and varied, requiring patience and understanding from both of us. My daughter, who had been most affected by the chaos, was hesitant to trust again. She would test boundaries during visits, almost as if she expected her mother to revert to the paranoid behavior that had scared her so much. My son, being younger, adapted more quickly, but still had moments of confusion about why mommy had been so different for so long. Family counseling became a regular part of our routine, helping all of us process the trauma and learn healthy ways to communicate. The therapist helped the kids understand that mental illness isn't something to be ashamed of, and that their mother's behavior during her crisis wasn't their fault. These sessions also helped me learn how to support my ex-wife's recovery while maintaining appropriate boundaries for the sake of the children. One of the most challenging aspects of this journey was learning to separate the person from the illness. The woman who had tried to take my children away by falsely claiming I was unstable wasn't really my ex-wife. It was her untreated mental health condition speaking. Understanding this distinction was crucial for healing and moving forward, though it didn't happen overnight and required a lot of internal work. As months passed, something unexpected began to happen. The crisis that had nearly destroyed our family actually brought us closer together in some ways. Not romantically, that ship had sailed, but as parents committed to giving our children the best possible outcome. We learned to communicate effectively about the kids' needs, school events, and medical appointments without the anger and resentment that had characterized our interactions during the divorce. The kids began to thrive in ways I hadn't seen since before the marriage started falling apart. They were sleeping better, performing well in school, and had regained their natural curiosity and joy. My daughter started playing violin again, something she'd abandoned during the worst of the custody battle. My son joined a soccer team and made new friends, his confidence slowly returning as the stability in his life increased. About a year after the custody arrangement was finalized, we faced another unexpected challenge. My ex-wife's mother, who had been supportive during the custody battle, began questioning whether her daughter was truly stable enough to have unsupervised visits with the grandchildren. This created tension within the extended family and forced us to have difficult conversations about trust, progress, and the ongoing nature of mental health management. The grandmother's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Mental health recovery isn't a straight line, and there had been a few minor setbacks along the way. But I found myself in the unusual position of defending my ex-wife's progress to her own mother, explaining that recovery is a process, and that the children benefited from having both parents involved in their lives. It was a strange reversal from our custody battle, where I'd been fighting against her involvement. This experience taught me another valuable lesson about the complexity of family dynamics and mental health. Even well-meaning family members can sometimes hinder recovery by focusing on past behaviors rather than current progress. The kids needed to see their mother as someone who was getting better, not as someone who would always be defined by her worst moments. As we approached the 2-year mark since the custody arrangement was established, I began to reflect on how much had changed. The angry, scared man who had received those divorce papers felt like a different person. I'd learned to navigate single parenthood, co-parenting with someone with mental health challenges, and my own emotional healing from the trauma of nearly losing my children. The kids were now splitting their time more evenly between both parents, though they still primarily lived with me. Their mother had proven her stability and commitment to treatment, and the supervised visits had become a thing of the past. We'd established holiday schedules, attended school events together, and even managed to celebrate birthdays as a family unit, albeit a different kind of family than we'd once been. One of the most profound changes was in my own relationship with mental health awareness. I'd become an advocate for men's mental health resources, sharing my story with other fathers going through similar custody battles. The experience had shown me how easily mental health struggles can be weaponized in family court, and how important it is to have proper evaluation and support systems in place. I also learned to appreciate the strength it took for my ex-wife to seek treatment and work toward recovery. Mental health stigma is real, and admitting you need help takes courage, especially when your parenting is under scrutiny. Her commitment to getting better for the sake of the children was something I came to respect, even if I couldn't forget the pain of the custody battle. The relationship between the kids and their mother continued to evolve and strengthen. They began to understand that the person who had scared them wasn't really their mom. It was someone who was sick and needed help. This understanding helped them develop empathy and resilience, qualities that would serve them well throughout their lives. Today, as I watch my children play in the backyard, I'm struck by how different our family looks from what I once imagined. We're not the nuclear family I thought we'd always be, but we're something else, a family that's been through crisis and come out stronger. The kids have learned that adults aren't perfect, that sometimes people need help, and that love can survive even the most difficult circumstances. The experience taught me that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that nobody sees coming, but fighting for what's right is always worth it in the end. It also showed me that healing and forgiveness are possible, even after the most devastating betrayals. The woman who tried to take my children away by claiming I was unstable is now a partner in parenting. And while our relationship will never be what it once was, It's something functional and healthy for all of us. Looking toward the future, I'm cautiously optimistic about our family's trajectory. The kids are happy and healthy, their mother is stable and committed to her treatment, and we've all learned valuable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the complexity of human relationships. The custody battle that once felt like the end of the world became the beginning of a new chapter, one where we're all stronger and more aware of what really matters. The psychiatric evaluation that was supposed to prove my unfitness as a parent instead revealed the truth about our situation and set us on a path toward healing. Sometimes the system works, sometimes people change, and sometimes the most broken things can be repaired with patience, understanding, and commitment to doing what's best for the children who depend on us to get it right.